So, hi, I'm Katrina Machoro. I am with Portland Workforce Alliance. And today, with me for this talk about being Korean in the workplace is Sam Lee. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sam. I am a graphic designer, like specifically kind of in user experience, and which, if you don't know, it's like kind of like apps and websites and all those tech related kind of design things.
So, I know when approaching conversations about race, racial bias, gender, and social issues, it can be really challenging to know what to say, when to say, how to say it. And it also can be really uncomfortable and sometimes risky to confront these kinds of issues or have these conversations at work, especially where we're used to maintaining some level of reservedness and professionalism. So really
Yeah,
appreciate you having this conversation with us today and with the youth of the Portland metro area.
for sure. My pleasure.
So, what does being Korean at work mean to you?
Um, it's kind of funny. Like I don't specifically think what does it mean. But like looking back and being retrospective, I think like I represent something different. I'm some working in Portland, Oregon, and living in Portland, Oregon. It's like a very majority white um just population, and so I don't ever like go into work and be like, I'm Korean, I'm gonna be, this is who I am, like, but like looking back and just you know it I do represent something that's different than the status quo, and because of my otherness, I am more than just my position that I am at wherever I work, and whether I like it or not, it is something that exists.
What has been your experience navigating being Korean in the workplace in your professional career so far?
The term Asian is so broad, right? And like Filipinos to Koreans to like Vietnamese, it's so different culturally, and so the stereotype tends to be that Asians are very humble and quiet and all those things. And fortunately slash unfortunately for me, I do fall in those stereotypes. My culture, the culture that I grew up in, humility is really important. I think that like talking about yourself and being confident are married in Western culture, but in the way that I grew up, confidence and like boasting and being sure about yourself or talking as if you're sure about yourself aren't the same thing. And so that's been a really big struggle, as especially as I kind of rise and grow in my profession from being like an entry level designer to like being an art director and a creative director and all these things. So yeah, it has, it does heavily affect how I perceive myself and how I look back at all my positions that I've had. And I
Mhm.
do see a lot of like how my being Korean affects my career.
And so, thinking of that, what helps you be yourself at work so you still are staying true to your authentic self?
To be honest, like time has been um the best way of like learning and navigating through all of this, as I get deeper in my career, I have more confidence in what I can do. I've learned to be very picky about where I work now. Thank God for social media and like LinkedIn and like, I work in an industry where most companies will put up like their whole roster of people on their website. And so I am very picky about um, where I choose to work. It's not just about if everything is white, right? Like if every person is white that works there, it's also, is the leadership all white, what's my ceiling at this company? How high is it? It's also really important to find allies, wherever I work. Fortunately, I have had like sprinkles of either mentors or out like people who are similar to me in places I work. And, we rely on each other. It's almost like an unspoken rule with people in my industry that it's like, oh, we're going to stick together if, we have similar identities.
Working off what you just shared with us, what are some suggestions that you can give current high school students about how to do that type of work? Like, whereas, you're saying, I'm picky about where I work now. I look at these certain things. What and how should students look for when they're looking for their first job, if they identify as a person of color, or just in general?
I think more than anything, you like knowing that you have the right to choose where you work. A lot of times, and that was really hard. Like part of my parents and the way that we were raised, and then also coming out of the recession, the Great Recession, where we graduated and there were no jobs. We were just kind of like, we have to take whatever jobs we can get. I think that like knowing that like you don't have to say yes to any job offer you get. Granted, life situations happens. You need money. You need a job. You have to pay rent. Those sometimes those take precedence. But I think it's really important to be like, I know I have a feeling that this isn't going to be great. I also think it's really important, like now more than anything, when, we as like, people of color or as a woman, we have made room where we are allowed to ask things now, versus in the past, we were either criticized or shunned if we talked about things. But now, like when I interview, I ask hard questions. I ask like, hey, you're, during the BLM kind of protests, your company put up this whole mission statement. What have you done in the last year to 2 years that, that speaks to your promise that you put out? It's those kinds of things where, you are advocating for yourself and making sure that you're going to be working in somewhere healthy and somewhere that fully welcomes like who you are as a person, where it gets to the point where it only becomes about you being a designer and not me being Korean and a designer.
Speaking of self-advocacy, it's so important in the workspace. And you're saying, it starts at the interview, like you're interviewing the potential employer as well. And that's kind of where the self-advocacy starts. Can you tell us about an additional time where you've advocated for yourself at work and how you approached it?
The last place that I worked for actually I was working in like a startup tech world. And I had this realization as like these 40 people were in my office. I was like, I'm literally, once I leave this office, it is just an office full of white people. And that really like didn't sit well with me, because I'm also thinking, one, how did I get myself into this? Two, what am I not doing as a person? Like I was a leader in that company. I was like, what am I doing wrong too? Right. And then also like, I need to give this feedback to the company, And so, there was like the leadership team, and I sat down and I made it a point to say something, and I was like, it's in 2020, well, then it was 2021, but in 2021, how is it possible that if there's 40 people in an office, not one of them is a person of color, right? If you take me out of it, like that's really tough, right? And, I told my boss, I was like, the more you add people and the more you add people, and if they're not like either a woman or a person of color, it's like the less likely they're going to continue to work here, you know? And so I pushed back, and as like the only person of color, I can't be this like end all be all answer for you. It's something that I think that they all had to learn for themselves and for them to like look out for, you know?
And to clarify, you were advocating for more people of color and women in the applicant pool and to be hired, not because you are a person of color yourself, but because you were in a leadership position at that company.
100%, 100%. And I challenged all of them to find, you know, like there are a lot of groups like women in tech and, you know, artists of color groups and things like that. And finding groups that specifically specify in what our company did, rather than going to like Indeed or Craigslist or Facebook or wherever, you know, Monster, whatever, all the hiring things, which predominantly are white, you know, it led them to find talent that they necessarily wouldn't find in the average places that they were already going.
Considering you are not responding for all Koreans, Asians, or Asian Americans, this is really just your personal advice for students. What advice would you give to students who share similar identities as you about how to be themselves at work?
That's tough. I would say, for me, I mean, it's okay to be Asian, you know, it's okay to be Korean in the workplace. You know, you don't have to change like who you are. But you do have to figure out how to be who you are and still succeed, you know? And that's something that I'm still working with a lot, you know? I'm, you know, like this whole idea of self-confidence equals being like egotistical or, you know, whatever, like understanding that it's okay to be confident in your skills and who you are and what you bring to the table. And that's not a negative thing, you know? And just, yeah, I think it's okay to be who you are at where you work. Yeah. I think that it's okay like to be different. It's okay to be, you know, not the status quo. Like I think like it's so funny, like looking back, like I was so apologetically Asian in so many scenarios in like my social life and in my work life. And I didn't have to be. I don't have to be. And I'm almost jealous of, you know, people who are just getting into like, you know, like the professional work, you know, the work environment and how much progress that we've made since like I graduated 10 years ago. And you know, there is a lot more support and a lot more allowance and room for people to be who they are. And yeah, I think like run with it.
Why is it important to have these types of conversations?
For me, so especially in my field, which is so ironic because like South Korea is like one of the biggest creative hubs in the world in terms of like artistry and stuff. In where I'm from here in America, like Asians in my field just don't really exist, you know? And I think like if somebody sees this and somebody who looks like me or is like me, you know, sees this and like sees that there's somebody kind of like a few years ahead of them going through what they're going to go through. Like if I had that, like that would have been amazing, you know, that, you know, all the people that I was looking to as people to learn from and, you know, look up to, they didn't look like me. And so I think like it's you know, just for visibility you know, like for the sake of visibility, I think it's really important. I also think that like for people who don't look like me, it's really important to hear this stuff, right? Like if you are in the capacity where you want to learn more and you do see that things need to change, this is the great opportunity for you to have your ears perk up and hear what, somebody who doesn't look like you is going through. I do want to say, like, it's so interesting in talking about these things. It's always, there's always kind of like this like glimmer of negativity, we're talking about all these things that are wrong with being a person of color. But I do have to say that, like, I would never trade who I am and like my upbringing and like who I am for anything, like it's not that I love being different, like in terms, like, I don't, like, when I say I love being different, I don't mean it in kind of like a show offy or like, oh, I'm a star, like, I just mean that, like, it is nice to not be the status quo, it is like, I have something that is different from everything around me, like from, the way I interact with people, the food that I eat, the customs that I hold, the way that, like, I express and share love, it's different. And I love that. And so, in the sea of like kind of negativity and like all these bad things that, bad experiences that we're talking about, I love celebrating and becoming more confident in like who I am.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
It was my pleasure. I loved having this conversation with you. And I want to thank you for giving me the space to talk about my experience and my identity.